Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co.
I'm Professor Meg.
And today we are covering Harrow County from Jay Cormier and Off the Page Games. This is just Jay Cormier. This is game design Jay Cormier and Shad Miller. Shad Miller. Shout out to Shad Miller too, apparently. This is from Off the Page Games, and Harrow County is a, first of all, prototype, all disclaimers. This is a prototype, rules, components, all that stuff, subject to change. Slight box indentation, does not come with your final copy. And this is a Kickstarter as well. We'll have a link to that down below. But past that, I'm going to dive into a short mechanical overview, not a full rule season this one. We'll get into why and some of that aspects. But before I do you want to talk about the lore and the backstory of Harrow County?
Absolutely. So if you guys know Off the Page Games, a lot of their they have Mind Management. Mind Management is based off of a comic book series, and that's the same with Harrow County. Harrow County was a comic book series that came out a few years ago, and it's all about a very witchy, magical town that's basically like old New England, and it's about this girl, Emmy. She was born from a tree that a witch was buried under, so a lot of people are unsure what kind of powers she has and what control she has over the different haints and things throughout the world, and it's basically her trying to figure out who is evil, who is on her side, because a lot of monsters are actually good, and a lot of the people that look good are actually bad.
Yeah, and speaking of the tree aspect, once you talked about that, this over here, this box here, this tree, and this giant little white hole. Meg, do you want to pass me that tray over there?
Absolutely.
And while I hold this, do you want to go ahead and grab those cubes and dump them into the box?
Yes. This is my favorite thing about this.
We're jumping ahead, but this box has built in a little bit of a kind of cube tower.
I would have won.
Oh, I'm the protectors. I'm the family.
Oh, never mind.
You would have lost. This box over here has a built-in cube tower, things you may have seen in games like Shogun or Amerigo, and it's built into the box where we have to shake it now to figure out how everything pops out over there. There we go, we got the rest popping out. But you're going to use the actual physical box itself as the cube tower when you're resolving combat. Now that's kind of jumping a bit ahead. Mechanically speaking, as far as the game goes, and there's a lot going on here, I'm going to touch upon as much as I possibly can in a very short time frame. This is nowhere near close to a rules overview. This is a general overview. I'm not even getting to the rules specifically. But we have two factions at least to begin with. We have the family versus the protectors, and you can choose different characters to play as, and the game does take you through 5 different chapters of iteration, each chapter introducing you to new mechanics as you go. The very starting baseline of it is you're both trying to get to 7 points, and the way you gain points is you have asymmetric factions, asymmetric abilities, and asymmetric goals. The protectors are trying to grab back the various townspeople, pulling them back by creating a chain of the haints to those townspeople, versus the family is trying to create a chain of these little whirlwind tornado things over to the various houses. We have a house over here, trying to create a chain of them to the houses to be able to take those down. Doing that, destroying the houses or rescuing the townspeople will be worth 2 points each. Along the way, you can get points to do other things, including one of the big things is whenever you initiate combat, which is going to be where that cube tower comes in, you'll drop the cubes down, which is a whole pattern of how to get cubes into the cube tower, but you'll get points for combat as well in this game. You're going to be going back and forth in these rounds, taking actions based on these little jars you have, each jar giving you different types of actions, and again, this is where the asymmetry of the game comes into play. Every faction has different ways that they resolve some of these abilities, from the wild tokens you gather, from the various ways you have built out your token boards, from taking your own initial protectors, the various characters you're playing as, taking their abilities and utilizing those, and you're trying to do that as you try to gain control of the board, as you try to spread your haints around the board, as you try to build out your bag and your abilities, as you try to both achieve your own objectives and get in the way of your opponent's objectives in the game. That's basically Chapter 1. Chapter 2 is going to introduce you to a few new mechanics, including card play. It introduces more variable setup. It introduces decks of cards that you'll have on both sides. Again, asymmetric decks of cards, different ways that those play out. And you'll be using those to, again, modify the way you build out your tokens, the way you improve things. The protectors will have different abilities that influence the board, and the family has different abilities that give them better tokens for when they're pulling out from their bag, which, again, asymmetry. They have bag building, other factions don't. In Chapter 3, you'll introduce more setup and more intricacy, including bonus tokens based on when you take your actions. You'll be getting different bonuses based on the timing of the actions you're taking, as well as the fact that combat becomes a little less important because the combat starts scaling in terms of each combat errors is a little more difficult to get points out of them, and that extends the game and it puts more focus on the actual asymmetric abilities as opposed to a pure combat-based mechanic. Chapter 4 will introduce Kammi. Kammi is going to be a new character that you can play as. You can play Kammi against the protectors.
Kammi's so bad.
Yeah, you can play Kammi.
So bad.
she's not great. Her blood-stained dress is an indicator of that.
Yeah.
But you can play Kammi against the Protectors or against the family. Either one. It's still a two-player game, still two-player asymmetry, but introduces a new way. Again, same general concept. You're still doing the same basic things, but it changes the way you integrate with those things. And then finally, Chapter 5 introduces Hester, although Hester is specifically for a three-player game. Hester's going to be, again, a third faction enters the game, but as opposed to where Kammi replaces either Protectors or the family, Hester jumps in as a third faction where you now have three factions in play, all operating with different degrees of asymmetry. And this is where I'm not going into details on a lot of these things. There's different abilities, there's different characters, there's a whole bunch of things we didn't really touch on. We didn't really touch heavily on how Kammi and Hester operate. This is a scaling game that gives you a gameplay concept and then iterates it upon that gameplay concept across 5 chapters in this asymmetric, primarily abstract game, but like it feels fairly thematic for an abstract. It feels like a push and pull tug of war as far as what you're doing and how you're doing it, although it's abstract at its core, I guess, but doesn't really feel like an abstract as far as the game goes. Anything I missed on a high level there?
No, not on a high level.
Anything you want to touch upon that anything cool, interesting?
So I guess just to jump into it for Hester, I think something that's very cool that they add, these little haint minis are really, really fun and great. And something that really surprised me is that they look great, and then all of a sudden you notice that there's a little hole near their ears. And what Hester does is she takes like these worm things and puts them into their ears.
It's one of those bags there. I didn't take out everything. There's a whole lot of bags and components. It's going to be one of the small bags. No, small bag. It's going to be dedicated.
These are all
No, there we go. There we go. Yep.
So they're like these little things, and it's, if you picture like someone evil like and getting into their minds, that's exactly what's happening. Is you take this little worm thing and it goes into your haint's ear, and now they're like infected by Hester. That thematically I love. I absolutely and love. Mechanically. She's very scary in the comics. You do not want to encounter Hester whatsoever. And even the art that they chose for this character board, it's perfect for who she is. So that I absolutely love. And again, as a fan of the comics, the mason jars being the things that you flip over for your actions, that's very, very thematic to areas in the comics.
I have not read the comics. I played through the game. I have a backstory from both Meg and from Jay, getting a general backstory of what's going on here. But that's the game. That's the overall what's going on here. Which brings us to the review part of things, talking about the game. Meg, what do you like about Harrow County?
I love the tree. I absolutely love that. This is the first game I've ever played where
Cube Tower.
In the Cube Tower things will get stuck.
Yeah, the concept, for those who don't know, is inside the Cube Tower, there's no way you're going to be able to see this, there's different layers in there. And so what happens is it's not like a dice tower, it just means that when you drop things in, you don't know which things will get caught on the ledges and which things will fall through. And then the important thing is, even though some things might get caught on the ledge, the next time there's a battle, I might drop in 1 cube, I might drop in 3, but your 2 new ones get caught and knock out some of my old ones, so you never know what's going to happen, and eventually the odds even out, but in any individual battle it's uncertain. Yeah,
I really, really love that aspect. And I think it's a great 2-player game. I think that it is balanced really well. I had a lot of fun playing it together.
Yeah, I should note, by the way, for me, this is very much a first impressions because of the fact that there's so much content here, and we haven't even played as Hester yet. We haven't even dove into some of the later chapters, and so there's a lot going on as far as how much this game scales, and even along the way, there's multiple characters and multiple ways to go through the experience. And so there's a lot going on here. We have not fully dove into this, which means this is very much a first impressions. To that end, though, as far as things I like the asymmetry to begin with. I enjoy. Now, this is going to be very familiar to off-the-page games, to Jay Kammi. Mind Management, their first game, is it's as asymmetric as you get in terms of the gameplay experience, and this very much carries on that as well. All the factions are operating within the same basic premise, but operating very differently in how they interact with the world. It almost feels like you layered a game of Root over an abstract strategy game, and you have that degree of shifting allegiances, shifting factions, the same game board, the same tokens, but the way you use tokens, the way I use tokens are different. And there's a constant challenge as far as how you build out your bag or your action tree, and again, this goes back to the asymmetry aspect. As the Protectors, you're choosing which actions you want to power up, and as the family, you're choosing how you want to build out your bag, but the net result is the same. Do you want to focus more on spawning more haints, on moving more haints for that control? Do you want to focus better on battle? Battle can be a huge thing, but as you go through the game and as you evolve through the chapters, battle becomes a little less important because you're going to start getting fewer and fewer points. The game gives you a lot of those shifting aspects of what you're trying to do and how you're trying to do it. Which mason jars do you want to activate? Do you want to activate your wild every single round? Because each time you activate your wild, you get a wild action, but you also get a wild token, and you take 1 action for each wild token. So if you don't focus on your wilds, you might have stronger actions early game. If you do focus on your wilds, mid to late game, you're going to take very strong, very customized actions. And that gives you a degree of, do you want to focus on this or that? Combat as well. Combat is the only action you can actually take that you can do multiple times per round. And that again focuses, if you build out your combat, if you focus very heavily on that, especially in the earlier chapters where combat gives you more points, you can just destroy people through combat. But if you also stop paying attention, you might have developed, as has happened, people might develop pathways to their characters to be able to pull in what they need. This has that very mindful aspect I've seen in other games. Games like, let's say, SAR, for example, where there's multiple pathways towards victory, and as I'm trying to pivot and adjust to stop you in one arena, it's up to you to try to overpower me, or to just pivot and adjust and try to win in a different arena. And I like those shifting allegiances of that. Component-wise, this game is, this is a prototype, but off the chart. Between the box itself, those ear things you pointed out.
Yeah, and again, as a fan of the comics, these haints, the design of these is just perfect. It's exactly what you would expect to see from reading the comics.
Yeah, everything they have, the little spoon dials, you can't really see that, but there's a little spoon dial which tracks your points, but on top of it also tracks how many haints it takes, how many you have to kill before you get a point, and that's escalating. Everything here, again, prototype, even in prototype form, is great as far as the component quality. Overall, really enjoy a lot of the layered aspects of how this game operates and how it iterates and develops through the experience. Anything else?
The thing I'll say is I played this back, like, right after Gamma, and then we played the base game again, and I think we played it one more time before we started going into the chapters. The cards that get added, for me, was exactly what was missing. I really think with the cards, adding that extra piece, I really, really enjoyed that. Yeah,
and again, that's only a few layers deep. There's still some more layers to discover as far as the game goes. As far as things you don't like, anything you don't like in this game?
I want to say, as someone, again, as a fan of the comics, I think mechanically this is strong and great, and it does make sense that you're the two groups fighting against each other, but I'm not sure if that exact battle makes sense for the lore of the comics, like for how they would be battling, but that's pretty much it. The gameplay I absolutely adore. I loved it. I guess my only other complaint, which is a personal us complaint, is that because we were playing through the chapters, I was always the protectors. So we haven't yet gotten to swap and play different sides.
Yeah.
But that's just me complaining to you.
Yeah. For me, there's a few different things, small things, but for me there's a few things. The first is that, and this goes back to the way the chapters iterate. Early chapters, the first two chapters, I kind of feel that combat is a little too prevalent as far as the dominating aspect of the game, meaning this game very heavily gives you high degrees of asymmetry as you go through it, but then combat happens to be one of the things that feels less asymmetric. It feels more like we're going for the same goals, and we iterate towards that a little differently, but the general concept of combat plays out the same. And yet in the earlier chapters, you could kind of, not necessarily ignore your goals, but you could focus less attention on them and score 5-6 points from just combat. And that's because the combat doesn't really iterate or evolve in those first chapters, which means to some extent, depending on how you play the game, the first chapters could allow you to focus on a little bit less of the strengths and the asymmetry of the experience and focus a little more heavily on combat that potentially feels a little too easy until you get to chapter 3 where it starts scaling it up in a different way, making it less accessible. So that just puts a focus on an area of the game that I wouldn't want the focus to be on in the earlier chapters. I almost wish the spoon were even introduced in chapter 2, or even in chapter 1, honestly. I don't think it's a very hard concept, and I think it just changes the way you approach this game, and I think I like it more once you start having to really focus more on your unique goals. So that's going to be one aspect there. Past that, and I knew that there's another complaint I had, which is...
I do agree with that as well.
Yeah. It's a lot. The combat's great. I think the way I'd put it is our first games, we kind of focused on our goals, and incidentally, we got to enjoy the experience. And only in some later games, before getting chapter 3, we got to the part where we're like, actually, combat's kind of just the way to go here to it.
Last time we played, I went for blood.
Yeah. And it happens to be we didn't the first few games, which was great, because we got to actually explore it. But I think we did so... I think we almost played inefficiently, but managed to enjoy the game because we played inefficiently, versus had we just gone for blood from the get-go, I think we wouldn't have explored the full experience. Yeah. Past that, kind of what you mentioned about the cards, how you mentioned the cards added the thing I was missing. Part of the potential problem that Harrow County has is the very nature of the chapters does mean that you are iterating through an experience, and it's going to take multiple plays before you see what this game has to offer. That does mean that if chapter 1 isn't enough for you, you may pack up and move away from this game before you get to chapter 2 or chapter 3 or chapter 4, etc. We had this conversation around Forsaken that we recently covered. That someone asked me in the comments saying, hey, if you weren't reviewing or covering this game, would you have played it to the point where you love the game? And I always loved Forsaken, side tangent, I always enjoyed Forsaken, but my opinion of it grew after multiple plays. And so I would say that my answer to that person was no. The way I play games, the way I dive into games is I kind of give it 1 or 2 plays, and if you haven't hooked me, I'm done and I move on. And hooked is the key word. Not just enjoy, hooked. I'm trying to play my favorite games, and so games that require multiple plays to get into, because I'm reviewing them, because I cover them, I will play them more, but otherwise I wouldn't. And so I do think Harrow County, I almost wish they kind of condensed chapters 1, 2, and 3 into chapters 1 and 2. I feel they could do so. I feel that it's a little bit too much of a gradient upwards, and that means you are asking players to more heavily commit to the experience to see if it's for them. And that's before we even get into Emmy and Hester, which are other factions that I can kind of see.
Yeah.
But like I think 3 is where it kind of hits more of its tempo of the experience, and I honestly, to a degree, I feel there might be a recommendation of, hey, just jump straight to chapter 3 if you are newer to games 1 and 2.
Right. That's the thing, is that we are experienced gamers coming in wanting a lot from it, which I think is most gamers. But I think as an intro for someone who's a fan of the comics, this is a way to get into board games.
100%. And those people, fortunately, are not yet overwhelmed with having a million board games options.
Right.
I remember when I first got into games, I got like 5 games and I played them all 50 times.
Right.
Over time, I found that I love playing different games, but it's one of those contextual complaints, but it's something that it's at the very least it's worth being aware of so you can decide how you want to engage with this experience.
And for people that enjoy exciting moments in games, for me, I was hooked after the first game because of this tree tower. That it was so fun and pivotal that there were different times where it was one kill would make the difference of what you could do on the board, and that was really exciting. I really, really liked that.
Nice.
It's fun.
As far as final thoughts, moving into general, and I don't know if I'm going to give this rating one in terms of where I am. I still want to explore more. Like you said already, I still haven't seen your side, and there's still a lot of things we haven't touched upon. Even the card decks, there's still aspects of iteration and upgrades, a whole bunch of things we have not seen about this experience. Overall, for me, I really enjoy Harrow County. I'm not fully in love with it the way I am with like Mind Management, his last game. I really enjoy it, and I really like the back and forth. Part of the issues for me are that, like I said already, the combat, to a certain extent, I'm still getting over the aspect of where combat is, and some of the back and forth aspects of trying to pursue your own goals. One of the aspects I haven't seen, I probably should have covered this and what I don't like, is I haven't yet seen as strongly, and this could be due to our own inexperience, the aspect of being able to fully cut someone off once they're making their way to a goal.
Yeah.
It doesn't have that full tactical pivot. It has a degree of you're trying to achieve your thing, there are different degrees of strength to it, but even combat, even fighting, for instance, if I'm trying to fight you and stop you from getting there, it usually doesn't require that much of a pivot to be like, okay, and now I just move somebody back to where you killed. It's not as easy to block and stop somebody, or at least we haven't seen that quite as much. I overall very much enjoyed the experience. It gives you that iteration. It gives you high variability. It gives you a ton of ways to explore it. It gives you new characters that we haven't yet delved into. There's a new individual characters you have for even the individual factions as you're going through it. There's a lot of ways to explore this game, a lot of components we haven't touched upon. Overall, I really enjoy it, and I'm excited to continue diving into it, but I do have to see where I end up as far as where this one goes. Where are you at?
I will keep playing this one. And again, I think it had me hooked from the get-go that I heard Harrow County and I was like, I have to play this game, I have to find it, I have to get it to the table. So alone, the thematics of it, that being able to use Hester, I want to get to that chapter.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that one is 3-player, we would need a third person, but I want to go through all of the chapters just because of my love of the comics. That being said, I do love the gameplay as well.
Yeah.
I also really want to try as the family. So this is one of those games that I want to try more of it and all of it. And
I'm very happy I did enjoy it and play as a family. To me, the family has bag building, which I very much enjoy. It has an aspect of trying to cultivate and curb your bag as you take tokens out to both draw more from your bag, but also to enhance the experience of the way you engage with it. Overall, that really worked for me. Versus the protectors have a lot more control. But I guess, I don't know. Like I said, I want to try both. Yeah, that's where I am with it. But yeah, overall, that's Harrow County from Jay Cormier, from the game of Gothic Conflict from Jay Cormier and Shad Miller from Off the Page Games over on Kickstarter. We'll have a link down below. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co.
I'm Professor Meg.
And hope you have a good one.
Bye.